This is an article from mysteriousuniverse.org entitled A Harrowing Account of Aliens in the House by Brent Swanser. Alien encounters are a very weird, often very frightening corner of the UFO phenomenon. Being faced with otherworldly entities can be a life-changing experience for those who have gone through it, and can haunt them for years afterwards. Their brush with the unexplained is something they cannot fit into the world as they knew it before. One thing that most people might take comfort in is thinking that these sorts of things only ever happen along lonely rural roads or out in the wilderness, but this is not always the case. In some instances, it seems like there is nowhere safe from such forces, including the perceived safety of our own homes. Within the files of the Mutual UFO Network, MUFON, is a rather intriguing and frightening case that allegedly occurred to an unnamed witness in 2000. The witness had just moved into a new home in a secluded hillside community in Whittier, California, and it seemed to be a dream home that he looked forward to a bright future in. At first, nothing strange or unusual happened, and he, his wife, and 2 young children were adjusting to their new life. The future looked promising indeed, but little did they know their perfect little life and home was about to be invaded by forces beyond our understanding. One evening in October 2000, about 3 months after they had moved in, the witness came home at around 11 p.m. to find his wife and 2 children asleep, and he went to the living room to relax and watch some TV. He describes the room as being dark at the time, the only light being from the television and the nearby kitchen and laundry room. The flickering glow of the TV lulled him into a drowsy state, and he found himself nodding off, but was soon roused by the sound of rustling coming from the kitchen area. He says it sounded almost like the rustling of a chip bag, and that it was quite startling considering he was the only one up. He says of it, quote, "The noise caught me off guard because I was the only person awake in the house. From my chair, I could look down the hallway to the bedrooms and would have seen if anyone had gotten out of bed and walked to the kitchen. Besides, the kids at this age never woke up after falling asleep, and if they had stirred awake, I would have heard them get out of their beds, and they surely would have called out for me or my wife. My view of said hallway was unimpeded, and from my sitting position in the living room was directly at my 11 o'clock. My heart raced as I knew none of my family members were actually in the kitchen. I became more alarmed as the rustling lasted a very long 5 to 6 seconds. I was in total belief that someone was in our kitchen. The noise was clear, slow, and deliberate, and there was no doubt that it was coming from inside our home and specifically from our kitchen. I was frozen. I blurted out, 'Who's up?' for some reason, but there was no answer. The rustling immediately stopped, I assume, as a reaction to my verbalization. I was certain someone was in our home as my senses went wild. My hair on the back of my neck and arms stood up, and I felt a burning sensation down my spine." End quote. Thinking there was an intruder in the house, he thought about trying to find some sort of weapon, and as he stood up, the TV and both lights in the kitchen and laundry room abruptly turned off. His first thought was that the trespasser had cut the power, and now he began to panic, certain that his family was in imminent danger. He cautiously made his way towards the kitchen, taking off his belt in order to be able to swing the buckle as a weapon and planning to grab a knife the first chance he got. He warily approached the kitchen entrance, and when he peered in, there was no one there and no way they could have hidden or gotten past him without him noticing. Thinking this to be odd, he checked the laundry room, and there was similarly no one in there either. Realizing that he was going to have to search the house room by room, he grabbed a knife and crept to his children's rooms to find them fast asleep. Nothing seemed amiss, but things would get strange when he went to the master bedroom to check on his wife. He explains, quote, "My wife, who had been asleep during the entire incident to this point, was oddly sitting upright on her side of the bed. I did not notice if she had been sitting up as I entered the master bath seconds prior. Nevertheless, she was sitting erect, and this caused me to stop my gait immediately. I was now 1 foot past the master bath threshold, standing in my bedroom, once again approximately 9 feet away from the foot of the bed. She then whispered in a perturbed tone, 'Why were you standing over me?' Remaining still, I responded, 'I just walked in the room. I wasn't standing over you.' She replied, whispering and even more upset, 'Someone was standing at the foot of our bed looking down on me. It woke me up. I know what I saw.' My heart raced again as I placed my index finger of my right hand to my lips, urging her to be quiet. I cleared our bedroom as my wife sat in the bed with the blankets up to her nose. The master bedroom was now clear. The only place the intruder could be is in the last room of the house, the office. I shushed my wife again, not having time to share all that had transpired, and deliberately set out to clear the office." End quote. Searching the office turned up nothing, and he told his wife to get up and come with him to the living room. At this point, the lights still did not work, the switches having no effect, leaving them in the darkness. Once in the living room, he told her about what had happened and asked her for more details on the figure she had seen, but she could only say that it was a quote-unquote tall, dark figure, and that she thought it had been him. He insisted that it had not been him and went about lighting some candles for illumination, the room cast in an eerie glow awash with shadows that could be hiding anything. What was odd was that the street lights were on outside and the neighbors' lights were on, so the power to their house had definitely been cut, but why and by whom? He says of what happened next, quote, I opened the front door and walked out onto our porch. I had a strange heavy feeling on my chest and felt uneasy. I found this to be odd as I had calmed down completely from the earlier night events. As soon as I exited our front door, I felt anxious and edgy for some reason. I noticed that the power was out on all the residences on our side of the street, the north side as it were. There were no porch lights on our side of the street, and that was not the norm. I came back in the house and told my wife that I was going to take a walk up the street to see if the power to the residences north of us was out. She went ballistic. She told me under no uncertain terms that she did not want me to leave her and the kids alone in the house, especially after the events I had told her that had transpired minutes earlier. She grabbed my right arm and begged me to stay in the house with her. I would not be denied. It was as if I was compelled to go outside and take a look around. I felt like I was being drawn to investigate the night's activities further. What happened next was unbelievable. End quote. He says he walked down the street to the corner, and at this point he sensed an odd, heavy feeling in his chest and an edge of panic that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up, as if something very dangerous was about to happen, even though the street was quiet and nothing was there. He felt truly scared for some reason, although he had no idea why. He looked down the street and saw no one out, the place totally placid, and not wanting to leave his wife alone for too long, he headed back towards his house. As he did so, he claims that the entire street was suddenly lit up by a bright white light, almost blinding in its intensity. He could tell that the light source was above the trees and was slowly moving in a southerly direction from the mountainside, but couldn't accurately tell what the height of the light source was or what object or vessel was emitting the light because it was too bright. He says of the strange light, quote, the light continued to move slowly southbound at what appeared to be approximately 5 to 7 miles per hour at best. The light was now directly over the middle of the street, and the light beams continued to shine through the tree branches down onto the street. I remember looking down at the street again to marvel at the brightness of said light. I took several steps forward, keeping the light source in my vision at all times. I found myself not under the protection of the trees any longer. I was now in open space in the middle of my street, almost directly in front of my house. The residence directly across the street does not have a ficus tree in the front yard, and this allows an unimpaired view of the sky looking southbound. The light source was now more or less over the house directly across the street from my residence. There was no sound emitting from the slow-moving light source, no chopping of blades such as you would hear from a helicopter. There was no jet engine or propulsion noise present. There was no green or red aviation flight lights present as well. The light source was too low to the ground to be any craft I have ever seen. Suddenly the light accelerated forward in parallel to a speed I can only describe 10 to 15 times faster than that of a meteor racing downward and across the sky entering our atmosphere. The light source traveled an immense length airspace in less than 1 second. If I had to estimate the distance it traveled, I would have to say approximately 30 to 40 miles in the previously described 1 second of time. At the time of its parallel acceleration, not a sound was emitted from the light source. It remained absolutely silent in its forward motion, and the light became smaller in size almost instantly. The light source size was that of a grape from the position I continued to observe it from. Then the light source took a vertical trajectory, comparable to a child sliding quote-unquote up, not down a slide. The light source during this upward trajectory increased speed and was traveling even faster than it had during its initial parallel acceleration. The size of the light source at its last visible observation as it turned upward was now that of a small pea. Suddenly it was gone, simply disappearing out of sight and, what I believe to be, out of our atmosphere. End quote. At this point, the witness was utterly dumbfounded, and he quickly made his way back home to tell his wife what he had just seen. As he explained what had just happened, they were both startled when the lights in their home suddenly jumped back to life once again and the TV filled the silent room with noise. The witness thinks that this was a UFO, and that one or more of its occupants had been sneaking around his home for reasons unknown. If this is true, then who or what were they, and what did they want? Why pick his house of all the houses on the street, and what were they looking for? We will probably never know, and this remains a rather curious case that illustrates that sometimes we are not safe from the UFO phenomenon, even within the perceived safety of our own homes.